Well, we are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. This is Dr. Lorne Lavine. Many of you know me as the digital dentist. As of this afternoon, we had about 300 people that were registered for the webinar, so I'm really pleased with the turnout that we're going to have for tonight. I see a good number of people are already here. I'm only going to talk for a couple of minutes here. I want to make sure that we give Rohit enough chance to cover his material. And he and I had also said that we really want to make sure we leave a lot of time for Q&A. We had done a similar topic on HIPAA compliance about 2 months ago, and it was called 10 Burning Questions. And we got great feedback from that webinar. The issue that we got, or the feedback that I got from a lot of people, is that it's just overwhelming. Many of you may have heard of the new HIPAA omnibus rules that came out in March that have to be implemented by September. It's really overwhelming for a lot of practices. So Rohit and I talked and said, you know, what if we can just reduce it down to 3? What are the 3 things that you really need to start off with right now to try to get your office HIPAA compliant? And obviously we have not forgotten about the people up in Canada who have similar regulations up there. So one thing that is really important is that you get your questions answered. All of you on your screen should have a little GoToWebinar control panel. You can go ahead and type in your questions. We're probably not going to get to the questions until we're done speaking. But if you put the questions in as you think about them, we'll do our best to make sure we get to every single question before we're done this evening. By tomorrow, you'll see a number of things. First off, when you log out tonight, there's going to be a really short survey. Just if you want Rohit to follow up with you, if you want me to follow up with you, just indicate that as well. We are recording this webinar, so in case you can't stay towards the end or you get distracted, whatever, don't worry. We are going to send everyone a link with the completely downloaded, the link to download the webinar so that you can watch it at your convenience. So we want to go ahead and get started tonight. So as I mentioned, for those of you who don't know me, this is Lorne Lavine. I was a practicing periodontist for 10 years. What I've done over the last number of years is focused on technology, consulting, helping offices get chartless and paperless and obviously HIPAA compliant as well. This is something I've enjoyed doing for a long time. Over the last few years, I've really also focused on doing webinars. I think the webinar is a great format for people to get up to speed on some of the latest regulations, on what's new and out there. And it hasn't always just been my area of expertise, which is technology, but things like physics forceps and demand force and 6-month smiles. And I mean, many of you have been on those webinars in the past. And really the goal here is just to provide content that I think is interesting and beneficial and, you know, maybe it's a little controversial, that's okay. But at the end of the day, if you got something out of it, if you got a few little nuggets or pearls of information, then it was worthwhile. Now, while I do think of myself as fairly well-versed when it comes to technology, when it comes to something like HIPAA, even though I do talk about this in a lot of my lectures and a lot of the articles that I write, I wouldn't go so far as to call myself an expert. Fortunately for everyone on this call, we have someone with us tonight who is absolutely an expert. Many of you will probably remember Rohit from the previous webinar we did a couple months ago. He's done it all in this field. He's held senior executive positions with life science and technology companies in the U.S. and Canada. He's really focused on using technology for effective communications. He's got a bachelor's degree in molecular biology, a master's degree in medical sciences, and he's a lawyer as well. So certainly when it comes to something like HIPAA, I think we're in really good hands. He and I have talked about what we're going to talk about this evening. I think you're hopefully going to get a lot of information out of this. So it really gives me great pleasure to turn the microphone and the screen over to Rohit. And I will certainly be jumping in as we talk throughout tonight's presentation. So welcome, Rohit. Good to have you back here.
Well, thanks very much, Dr. Lavine. It's a pleasure to be back. I have to say that after the last webinar, we were overwhelmed with the number of questions, and as you said, there was some concern that the way to get started is complicated. Frankly, you know, there's a number of things that have to get done and have to get done fast, and I think our approach for this one I really like, because we're giving everyone a place to start. And you know, as you and I have talked, this is going to be something pretty interactive between you and I, because I know that you spend quite a bit of time, Dr. Lavine, in the practices. And from a real-world perspective, I'm probably going to be asking you questions about how to get HIPAA compliant. So if I just look at the agenda here, we wanted to keep it very simple. We're going to start with the first step, which is to start. You want to plan your first HIPAA meeting in your practice, and we're going to talk through what a meeting agenda even looks like to make it even more accessible by everybody here. The second point is how to safeguard your patient health information in the practice. So what steps do you have to take in order to start down the path of safeguarding that information? The third element is, now how do you keep that patient information protected as you're using it in collaboration, whether that be to a specialist, whether that be to a lab, or whoever else might be involved in patient care. So that's going to be the topic. I think, Dr. Lavine, you already mentioned that there are some recent changes to the HIPAA legislation, and those changes that have been implemented, by the Health and Human Services own admission, they're the most sweeping changes since the laws were first implemented in the mid-90s. So they went into effect, these regulations, on March 26, 2013. So the discussion that we're having now for sure is on point and certainly relevant from a timing perspective, because compliance is required by September of this year. So the final rules that have just been implemented, there are a number of elements here that we will talk through a little bit of, but again, not to overwhelm. I think the message tonight is what we're going to do is get started. And there are some things that we can do relatively easily and relatively quickly that will start us down the road to becoming HIPAA compliant if you haven't already. So let's maybe start with the poll. I'm interested in, and we've got a number of people online, I would like to know what steps you've taken to get to HIPAA, or in Canada, the PIPEDA compliance. So the first step that a lot of people might have taken is answer a checklist. The second is you've already looked at your patient record management procedures and had some assessment of them done just internally. The third element might be that you've actually started to limit access. And then the fourth element might be that you've actually changed how you share patient information. So, Dr. Lavine, I'm wondering if we can do the poll right now.
Yep, we're going to launch it right now, and I would ask people, you can, you may have multiple answers here, and that's okay. I'll check off all the ones that apply. I want to just touch on one point that, and we talked about this briefly, that Rohit mentioned. These new rules are called the omnibus regulations, and they're pretty sweeping rules. If you go to Google and just do HIPAA omnibus, you'll find a number of websites that can go through in far more detail what we're going to cover tonight. But I would agree with Rohit that this is absolutely is just the biggest changes that we've seen with HIPAA and high tech since it first came out. So we're just waiting for a few more votes to come in here. Don't want to keep it open forever, but so what we're finding here, let's give people just another little chance. I want to at least get up to about half of the people who have voted here. But these are numbers that I was kind of actually expecting, Rohit, when we put together this poll here. Somewhere around 37% had said that they answered a checklist on HIPAA and the PIPEDA recommendations. 55%, so just over half, had assessed current patient record management procedures. Half have made changes to limiting access to patients' sensitive data, and only about 41% have made changes to the way that they share this data.
Well, actually, those numbers are better than I expected. So, I think that your audience is our audience here is probably better than we had originally expected. So that's excellent. What we're going to do is start by looking at those steps that we started off with. So the first step in this one is to plan the first HIPAA meeting in your practice. And again, for the Canadian listeners, the first PIPEDA meeting. What we're finding from a legal perspective is that there's quite a bit of translation, or quite a bit of overlap between the two. So if I only say HIPAA, understand that the same applies in Canada to the PIPEDA regulations. So the first one element is start the conversation. And I think what we're going to do now is provide a little bit of an agenda for that first meeting. So the first thing that we would say is, again, start the conversation. There's an opportunity here from an awareness and an education perspective where you just want your staff to start talking about it, the entire staff. One way that we would recommend, probably the easiest way that I could think of, was show them either this webinar or the webinar that we did previously with Dr. Lavine, which is the 10 burning questions on HIPAA compliance. What that will do is it will start to create a real dialogue inside the practice so that people start to be aware of the things that they need to be aware of. Even if you don't have complete procedures and policies, the conversation needs to start. And that's just as easy a way to do it as anything else, taking a lunch hour and having people view that. If you need to keep the practice, depending on the practice details, we can even do that in a couple of sessions so that you can have enough of the staff still working. The second step that we found to be super important is that of a project manager. So you really want to start designating a project manager as a matter of course so that you can start to plan around the things that you need to do. There are certain requirements in HIPAA for designating security officers as well as privacy officers, but from our perspective, that's just a sub-element of a checklist or a project manager. But you do end up having to designate some people within your practice already who are just going to kind of corral all of that information and be on the lookout for new regulations. Now, point number 3 here is complete the checklist. Now, I think there's a number of listeners here who've already taken that step. At the same time, if you haven't had an opportunity to do a checklist for how you might fare in HIPAA regulations, our recommendation here is if you just write the word checklist in the comments section or the questions section, we will send you one that we think is particularly good. So just enter that into your screen, and when we get the comments back, we'll make a point to send those to you. And finally,
when you log out of the webinar tonight, you're going to have basically 3 questions. One is going to be, do you want me or Rohit to follow up with you? And I've created another question there that if you want the checklist.
Oh,
so
great.
You can put it in there now. I see a number of them coming in right now, but certainly as well, when you log out, you can go ahead and just indicate. The other thing that we're getting, Rohit, a lot of people are asking about where to watch the 10 burning questions. Now, I believe you guys have been sending out the links, so would you follow up with that and give people the link that they want to go ahead and download or watch it for the CE credits?
Yeah, perfect. Yeah, that makes sense. I think what we've got there as well is not just the questions or the webinar. We've also taken it one step further. We got a number of questions. I think they ended up being like 10 or 12 pages of answers that we put together. So we'll include all of that in the same package. So even if you've watched the webinar, you may still want to see the answer to all those questions if you haven't seen them yet.
Okay.
But yeah, absolutely. If people just want to make a note, we will send them that packet as well.
Great.
And then the final step is really just we call it timeline, and I think this is around the deliverable of a project manager. So the project manager that you've assigned, and again, this could be someone already in your practice, and probably should be someone already in your practice, who now knows that they just have to look after this, and then determine some next steps and set the goals. And I'll tell you, after completing a checklist, some of those things are going to be pretty self-evident, what you have to do next. And not to make this, I want this to be very far away from a scare tactic or anything that's untoward, but the fact is that action is occurring. And I don't have any of the dental examples here in this particular slide, but I'll give you an idea of what's happening in the U.S. with respect to HIPAA. Now, I do have some other Canadian examples a little bit later, but in this example, and this was a $100,000 fine, and the need to take corrective action in this case. And you can see here a couple of bullet points where they failed to implement adequate policies and procedures there in about the middle of the screen to appropriately safeguard patient information. The interesting thing about this case, and the reason that I wanted to show, is that there was some policies that were in place, but it didn't necessarily safeguard all of the electronic data. And if you read this paragraph, the second or the third paragraph, they talk about limited safeguards in place to protect electronic protected health information. So we're going to focus on that specifically through the rest of the seminar. The other news release is around the Hospice of North Idaho, and I'll tell you this stuff, to be honest, is a little bit sad, because you figure the hospice probably has very little money in order to pay these types of fines. At the same time, you can imagine the high degree of sensitivity around keeping that patient information private. So there was a $50,000 fine levied in that case, and both of these are relatively recent cases within the last year anyways. And if you look at the last sentence of that one, the investigation found that it had no policies or procedures in place with regard to mobile device security, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in step 2 as well. So this is kind of the end of the step 1. So step 1, again, just to recap, get everyone together, start the dialogue, get a project manager rolling. Step 2, the challenge now is to safeguard the protected health information within your practice. And Dr. Lavine, I'm going to be leaning on you on parts of this one, because I think you've got quite a bit of information that can lend itself in the real world example that our listeners are in. So let's talk a little bit about the way that I look at this, which is there's real world and there's electronic world. The interesting part and the important part of this slide is that the governing principles in the real world are the same as the governing principle in the electronic world. And the governing principle in the real world is we need to restrict access to patient health information or protected health information to the people that must have it to deliver health services. And so really in the real world this affects who gets to see the files, or who gets to access the stored files. And I'm sure there's lots of real world examples that relate to that it sounds like some of your listeners have already taken steps to reduce the viewability, is how I look at it, of patient records. And so it's important to turn the monitors away from patients who shouldn't be seeing other patients' records. It's important not to have the fax machine spewing out patient information in front of the rest of the patients sitting in the waiting room. So there's a number of internal processes, and we'll talk about a few of them in a minute. Now with the electronic world, the important part about that is it's the same basic principle. But the difference is that in the electronic world, there's elements of information access, information transmission, storage, and archive that are difficult to get your head around unless you spend your day, like I do, thinking about the electronic world. And so part of what we're trying to do in this webinar is really talk through those elements of what does data access mean, and how do you transmit and store data in a secure way that's relevant for HIPAA. So let's take the first step, which is compliance within your practice. And of course this means restricting access and maintaining security of protected health information. The first is, how do you dispose of information? Do you talk about a specific case in a public area in the waiting room? Do you leave that information sitting on the desk, a patient's record? Is it sitting on the desk? Where is the storage of that protected health information? Is that behind a locked door, or at least behind a counter that's not accessible to most individuals? Labels, markings on the file containing PHI. Now, there was recently a case of a dentist's office, as a matter of fact, where for every patient that was HIV positive, that dentist had put a label on their files. On the outside of the files, it was a red label. As you can imagine, anyone who could see that red label knew immediately that that patient was HIV positive. So there was some sanctions delivered immediately when a patient complained actually, and that information got back to the authorities. And so there's things that we think might be reasonably obscure, like labels or markings on the files, but in that case, everyone that knew that a red sticker meant HIV positive immediately knew every other patient that had a red sticker had that same affliction. Location and access of fax machines, location and access of computers and monitors, and this is an important one, which is the protected health information on mobile devices. And we've got a couple of slides about this later, because I think this is possibly, in my review, the biggest place where there are offenses, where people get sanctioned on a regular basis with respect to protected health information on a laptop, on a mobile phone, on a tablet, or on those little thumb USB drives. Dr. Lavine, I'm going to impose on you here. Is there something that you wanted to add in this slide? I wanted to give you the opportunity because I know that you've spent lots of years in this particular spot.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things, and certainly we'll get to it a little bit more when we talk about encryption. I think the main point I would want to get across, Rohit, and this is something you and I had actually communicated on a few weeks ago, is that there really is a difference between protected health information and electronic protected health information. And after our last webinar, we received an email from someone who was concerned that they had gone to the dental board, I believe it was up in Ontario in Canada, and were told that the regulations were that any information that is taken off-site must have the patient's permission. Every patient must agree to it. And the person who had sent the email was assuming, and they were even told, that it really applies to all electronic information. When you look at when that regulation was actually adopted, there's no doubt that they were really talking about the physical chart, that there are physicians, there are dentists who take charts out of the office to work out at home, or maybe they have a home clinic. That's what it applied to, and we had discussed the fact that, well, no, if it's encrypted, if it's protected information, there's no way that that's not what the law was designed to do. Is that every single patient has to be okay? Like, for example, if that were the case, that every time you do an online backup, besides the fact that you really should be encrypting it, that you need the patient's permission, which you and I both agree that that probably was not really the intent or the way the law would be interpreted. I believe you may have a slide a little later on talking about encryption, and
I do.
Certainly I think that is unbelievably critical, and we can talk about how easy it is once you get to that in the presentation. But that's what I wanted to sort of to reiterate what you were saying, that a lot of the stuff is restricting the access and maintaining security, but there is a difference between what goes on in the electronic world and what goes on when we're still talking about paper charts.
Excellent. So again, if you do have any questions, enter them into the panel there, and we'll get to them around that last slide. Now, to be honest, I don't think it helps to go through all of the details of the HIPAA requirements that are on the slide now. I really just wanted to bring it up to let everyone know that there's behind the things that we are talking about, there's specific sections that we have worked hard to make sure that we can interpret for the people, for everyone who's listening. So if you do have a specific interest in one of these, I'd be happy to answer it after the formal part of the presentation. So let's talk about encryption. So whether it's the HIPAA laws, high-tech, or PIPEDA, they all require encryption of the records to protect the protected health information from being exposed. Now, it's important to talk a little bit about what encryption is. So sitting on your computer right now, potentially, are patient files. And those patient files can be open and they're available to pretty much anyone who sits down at that computer, with or without a password. I've spent a number of years in the computer industry, obviously, and I know that the passwords simply aren't enough to protect the computer at its basics. What happens through encryption is a mathematical algorithm gets applied to all of that information, and that algorithm is a long process, and it has a specific key that makes it impossible for anyone who doesn't have that unlock key to be able to read those files. Even if they steal the laptop or computer from your office, they simply cannot gain access to that information. The largest number, and this is important, the largest number of fines and censures that I can find are related to HIPAA violations because of lost and stolen mobile devices, like laptops, cell phones, USB memory sticks, etc. So to put that, to put that into context, if you've got a laptop that has patient information on it and it's sitting in your car, and someone breaks into your car, steals that laptop and can access that information, you will be held liable. And that it doesn't make immediate sense because I think that there's this sense that the criminal who broke into the car and got access to the laptop, that was absolutely a criminal act and that person should be liable. Well, that's not actually the case because the HIPAA regulations require that information to be encrypted. So even if that laptop did get stolen, or even if that little USB drive went missing, that they actually could not have gained access to that data because they wouldn't have the unlock key for that information. So some interesting stats. 113 cell phones lost or stolen in the U.S. every minute. That's 59 million a year. 56% of us misplace our cell phones or laptop each month. I'm raising my hand right now because I'm one of those 56%. 12,000 laptops are lost each week in U.S. airports alone. So some pretty amazing information. And all of this can really be managed through an encryption process. And Dr. Lavine, maybe you can step in here and talk about some of the programs that you've used in the past.
Sure. Well, there's actually 2 points I wanted to bring up here. Number one,
yeah, of course.
And we see this is a mistake that a lot of people are making, is that any of you that have looked at the HIPAA requirements know that there's two types of requirements. There's an actual requirement and what's called an addressable concern. And encryption falls under addressable. And what addressable says is that if it's reasonable, you have to do it. If it's not reasonable, then you have to come up with an alternative. If there is no alternative, then you have to document it. And that's it's a little more complicated than that, but that's it in a nutshell. The mistake that we sometimes hear some HIPAA experts making is that they're telling people, well, that's basically your get-out-of-jail-free card, that you don't have to encrypt the data because it's an addressable concern. And they tend to skip over that first part, which is to say, if it is reasonable, you must do it. It is not unreasonable in my mind or any people in the IT world's mind to encrypt the data. It is such an easy thing to do. If you have a Windows Server 2008 or later, 2012, if you have a newer Windows 8 computer, a laptop, tablet, anything like that, you have encryption built into that. There's something called BitLocker, and it's free. It's already included with the software. That doesn't mean that if you have an older system like Windows 7 or Server 2003 that you're out of luck, because there's still all kinds of options out there. There's a free program called TrueCrypt. It's spelled exactly the way it sounds, T-R-U-E-C-R-Y-P-T. You can Google it. It's a free program as well. It basically just creates an encrypted folder that you can then put all your data into. There's other ways of doing it as well. There's all kinds of encryption tools out there. When we purchase a server for a client, we're buying them with what's called self-encrypting drives. So it's just one more level of security and encryption built into the drive itself. But there is really just a lot of good options out there, and I think you would have a tough time if you ever unfortunately got audited to be able to say, well, we did not consider this to be reasonable, when there's free programs that anyone with any IT experience can help you install within an hour or two and meet all the requirements.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I'd say that, as I was mentioning, most of the violations that I've seen, most of the fines that I've seen, have been levied because there was no encryption in place. So, the Department of Health Services would certainly agree that this is an addressable. This is something that that is addressable. That is a requirement in my view. So the next element really is around data backup. Now, this is also one of those things that we would consider very, very important as a part of step 2, data in your practice. You want to make sure you've got an off-site backup, and we've cited the specific regulations there as well. You want to make sure that you can restore any loss of data, that the backup is encrypted, and that you've tested the recovery process to make sure you can actually retrieve the information that you backed up. And again, Dr. Lavine, I'll lean on you here a little bit to talk about some of the programs you've used in the past.
Right. Well, again, there's a lot of options out there. This is something that we provided for our clients for a number of years. It's a product we call Data Protect, and I think it's obviously very critical that you have it off-site. It has to be encrypted, as Rohit said. Where we unfortunately find a lot of people are falling a little bit short is that if they're using an online-only backup, the problem is if you ever need to restore that quickly, it could potentially be a very long process. If you've got tens or hundreds of gigabytes of data that you need to download, that can be an extremely time-consuming process depending on your internet connection. So we always recommend that you have a local copy of the server. We use a device that's waterproof and shockproof. We use special software to basically image the server, that we could use that device as almost as like an emergency server. And of course that is encrypted, and everything that we put up into the cloud is encrypted while it's being transmitted up into the cloud, and then the servers that we are storing the data on in the cloud are encrypted as well. And I can't overemphasize what Rohit has already said, that you have to get that out of the office. You've got to be able to restore it relatively easily. It's got to be encrypted. And a good system, and we do this for our clients, you need to verify that on a regular basis. And everyone's definition of regular is different. We typically do it once a quarter. You don't have to do this every week or anything like that. But at some point, you need to make sure that, hey, I want to make sure that I can restore if there ever was a loss of data in the office.
Agreed. So again, just like we did for the section before, I want to talk a little bit about enforcement for data in practice. And here's some examples, small and large organizations that have been fined for not maintaining protected information, protected health information properly. So the Massachusetts Ear Group, $1.5 million, Sutter Health, and these are very large organizations. This was not just a fine that was levied against Sutter Health, but there's actually a lawsuit that then it was initiated, so that Sutter Health ended up being liable not just to pay the fine, but also as a response to the lawsuit that was filed. And then also included the privacy breach from British Columbia for the Canadians, and that was, it's an interesting one. There's 38,000 people, and the interesting thing about that one was names and addresses weren't actually included in that. But there was such a neglect that occurred because it was a thumb drive, again, that went missing in a coffee shop. And the people who got access to it could have used it for very nefarious purposes. So there was a considerable fine that was levied. There's about $4 million of funding that dried up for University of British Columbia, and the story continued. The third and the final step in the 3 steps is safeguard protected health information in collaboration. So step 2 was we really focused on the information that's in your practice. And step 3, we're looking at the information that leaves your practice, and that's where, frankly, where we've focused our company in terms of trying to solve that particular gap. We recognize that collaboration is an important and regular part of the dental world, whether it be with specialists or the lab, and ensuring HIPAA compliance during that transmission is extremely important. And maybe this is a good opportunity now to talk about our second poll, which is how do you currently share patient files? You use Gmail or Hotmail or Outlook, Apple Mail, Dropbox, SkyDrive, or some other way, because in most of the practices that I visit, they're sharing information with their specialists or general dentists or other people in their study club or their labs. How are we doing on that, Dr. Lavine?
We're getting a lot of people coming in here. Okay. I want to give people just a little more chance to vote.
Sure.
I think one thing I wanted to bring up, Rohit, is that One of the things that the omnibus rule did, and I think this kind of dovetails into what you'll be talking about, is that it really strengthened the regulations and fines that affect business associates. And many of you have very critical data on your systems that you allow other people access to. It might be your IT company, it might be your practice management consultant, your accountant. You're giving them access to patient information. You really should have a business associates agreement with every one of those individuals, because they are now subject to the same rules and regulations and fines, and you as the covered entity are still liable. So this is not something you want to mess around with. So we're going to go ahead and we'll close the poll here, and I'm going to go ahead and share the results so people can see it. We've got a lot of Gmail users out there, a few people still on Hotmail, Outlook really popular as well, and some people using Dropbox and SkyDrive as well.
Excellent. Well, I'm just going to share my screen here.
Should be back on your screen now.
Okay, great. Yeah, we've got it. So what the interesting thing was, it's a bit of a leading question. The Outlook or Apple Mail, Gmail, Hotmail, Dropbox, SkyDrive, none of them are going to be HIPAA compliant. And this is a big surprise to most of the practices that I visit, because we've taken for granted, really, that form of transmission and that form of communication is pretty secure because we've entered in an email address. It actually isn't. The Gmail, for example, for those of you who don't know, Google reads all of your email. It's not secure. There's no business associate agreement, as you've mentioned, Dr. Lavine. This is something that's required. It's not auditable. And so there's a big gap between people using Gmail, Hotmail. Dropbox is the same way. Dropbox does not currently have HIPAA certifications, and they'll say that right on their website. And so although these are common tools that we all use, there's a big gap here and a considerable opportunity for concern. So it's worth talking just a few seconds about why email is not compliant. So even if your computer is secure, so even if you've taken Dr. Lavine's advice and you have your encryptions and you have all of the backup going through encryptions, when you send an email, it passes through dozens of servers that you don't know about before it gets to its destination. We call those middlemen servers, because all they do is they take that message and they send it to the next recipient. All of the systems that I listed previously, Gmail, Hotmail, Outlook, all of those systems, Apple Mail, they all use these middleman servers in order to transmit that type of data. At any one of those servers, that information can be compromised. And so now, the way we tend to look at it is the data in your office, we consider that data at rest. When you're sending that information, we call that data in motion, and it's important to be encrypted in both areas. Now, to make it even more confusing, when you do a search, and you'll look at the American Medical Association guidance, and it says, may a physician discuss information about a patient's treatment with other physicians using email. So the guidance from the American Medical Association says that yes, you can, as long as you're using reasonable and appropriate safeguards. And this is one of those loopholes that really should be concerning. So I've done a bunch of research, obviously, to find out what would be an example of a reasonable and an appropriate safeguard. And so I've found a number of guidance elements around this. So here's, it's a little bit tough to read in that small paragraph. So yes, the AMA says you can discuss information using email, but you can only use email if the patient has consented to the use of email, which I think is a good idea. Verification of the email addresses of recipients, which is important. You have to de-identify the information, transmit the minimum necessary, encrypt and decrypt the electronic personal health information that you transmit, which is actually in this context, quite difficult to do because it's not the same sort of encryption that Dr. Lavine was talking about. Do not email sensitive information or diagnosis. So that kind of makes me smile, frankly, because if you look at all of the steps that you have to take, you wonder how you can actually use email, because it certainly appears to be very difficult if you look at the guidance of how you can use it. So that's reasonable and appropriate safeguards. If I consider for a moment some of the things that have happened around electronic data exchange through email, again, a Canadian reference here, but there was an Alberta surgeon who emailed 3 images of his patients to who he thought was going to be one of the colleagues. Well, he mistyped the address on that email, and it ended up going to someone who actually happened to know the patient. And so what happened in this case was that patient, of course, complained because their protected health information was sent by email to someone who wasn't connected to the delivery of health services. So this particular orthopedic surgeon suspended for 10 days and was fined about $15,000. And it didn't even get to the PIPEDA laws or HIPAA laws. This actually was the Royal Society of Orthopedic Surgeons that just fined him for being so careless, sending email to the wrong person. Now, I know in real world this happens. It has happened to me, and it happens to many people because wrong email addresses can be entered. In any case, I'm going to speed up here a little bit because I see our time is going quite quickly. So let's get very practical. Very practical for us is, here's my Outlook, and I'm going to send, I'm communicating with the specialist, and I've entered his email in, and I've got some details about an implant. Well, the fact is that this is not HIPAA compliant because it's going into a Gmail account, and none of those other services are compliant either. In the service that I'm going to talk about, which we've termed secure mail, we actually have the same message going. We have the same attachments being added to this list. And we also have done a couple of other things. If you look at the top here, we've got visual confirmation of the recipient. So again, in the example that I suggested where you can mistype an email, we've taken that one step further and actually included a picture of the person you're sending it to. Now, they would have, of course, had to upload their own picture. That's their account. But it gives you that visual confirmation that that individual is actually the one that you want to send the message with. The other thing that we find is in our service, or in typical email, you have restrictions. Restrictions of 10 megabytes per message or 20 megabytes per message. Well, that doesn't work so well. It works so well if you're sending a lot of images, or if you're sending large images like a cone beam CT scan. So what we've done in our service is we've increased that to 500 megabytes per message. So you could drag and drop into the email a full cone beam CT scan, or a 3D STL image, or both, and a number of other images that you'd like. So 500 megabytes would be kind of like 50 images in a high-res camera. So it's quite a bit of data, and that all goes in a single message just to keep all of your information together. In addition to that, we guarantee the connections to the server; they're all secure. We've encrypted the data at rest and the data in motion. There's encrypted backups. We keep track of access, who has access to this. We log everybody's access, and it's entirely auditable, which means that if your patients come back to you in the future and say, hey, what happened to that image because it showed up on Facebook? Well, we can give back to you a full account of who has accessed those images and when they accessed them. And that becomes a pretty critical part of making sure that you've managed all of the secure requirements under HIPAA. So I'm going to now do a demo of secure mail, and I'll just take a few minutes. It's not a long demo because, as you'd expect, it looks and feels a lot like you would expect email to feel like. Just while I'm setting up for this, Dr. Lavine, I'm wondering if there's any questions that we should be answering.
We have a bunch of questions coming in, but I think we might wait until you've done the demo. There are a couple of people that already would be really interested in knowing the URL for secure mail, but I imagine you're going to get to that. So
Sure.
let's do the demo, and then we'll get to the questions.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen now?
We can.
Okay, great. So as you'd expect, this is a web-based system that allows us to keep track of everything that's happening on our servers. So in this example, we've got the dentist. His name is Pierre Fauchard. His username is pfauchard, and I've got a username and password. So let me log in here to his secure mail account. And you can see that there's various things about patients. There's various different messages here in the secure mail. What I'm going to do now is simply compose a new message just to get everybody to understand how simple it is. So in this case, I want to send my email to Dr. Wilhelm Röntgen because he's the radiologist that I like to use. I'm going to say, please note John Smith's information. Now, because I'm using secure mail, I can type in the patient identifier inside of the subject line. And now I want to include some information. And over the side of my screen here, I've got some images that all I have to do is drag and drop them. You can see that uploading there. I'll take another one, and I could have done 2 or 3 of these. And this is a particular referral form that I have available. And so I'm going to drag and drop that. So now I've got both of those images there, and I'm going to say, thank you, let me know how it goes. All I do now is hit send message, just like you would expect, and that message is now with Dr. Röntgen. So he's received that information. On the receiving end, what I'll do is I'll open up something, maybe this thing from Mr. Edward Engel. In my example here, he's from one of the labs that I use. You sent me this photo but forgot to enter the shade information. We've got built-in viewers that enable me to have a look at the images as they're coming up. So I can not only can I view the image itself without having to download it into my system, but I can also see any of the information. We call them annotations on our system. We can see the annotations at the same time. If I was so inclined, what I could do is just enter in my own annotation. And so say this is the tooth. Now, as soon as I click on this check mark, Mr. Edward Engel will be notified that I've actually made an annotation to the same image that he sent me. So we've kind of taken it one step further in terms of how quickly that collaboration can go back and forth. I'm going to close down the image viewer and just take us right back to my messages. And so I'm not going to go into much more detail. It's as simple as that from a demonstration standpoint. So what I'll do quickly now is just go back into my presentation, and I think we're pretty close to finishing up the presentation, but I have a couple of more points. The first is that we don't, in fact, require you to use any other email. Okay, it looks like I've got a bit of a delay here. So what we've got here is that we work with your existing email address, and basically what we do is make sure that even if you're monitoring everything through Outlook, and that's your normal email address, what we'll do is we will send you a link to your Outlook that says go check your message on secure mail. And so what you would do is you would simply click on this link that's in your message, and that would take you directly to that case so you can respond to it. Unfortunately, because of the HIPAA laws, we can't send you the exact message into Outlook because, again, we would be using an insecure service, or an unsecure service, rather. And so what we've done is, what we'll do is we'll send you a message to that gives you a link which connects you back to our system. So you don't have to change your email addresses. You don't have to go and register something new and tell all of the people that you collaborate with about your new email. So for secure mail, the location on the website is secure-mail.com. Now, our company is called brightsquid.com. You may have heard of us. I've got a little bit more about our company here in the next slide. But if you go to secure-mail.com, you'll see that email service available for $39.99 a month. Now, because of this webinar and because of an arrangement that we've made with Dr. Lavine, we're going to offer all of the users or all of the listeners $29.99 per month for the service, and that will set up your whole office. So it's not just the dentist. We set up all of the staff, and we make sure everybody's using the product completely within your office. The only thing that we ask is that when you are on the checkout screen, that you enter the code Lavine, because that will automatically apply the discount for you on a monthly basis. Now, just a little bit more about our company. You know, I think whenever people are signing up to this type of a service, you want to make sure that you're signing up with a reputable company. If you go to our website, if you go to secure-mail.com, it'll redirect you to Bright Squid Dental Link, which has a number of these types of testimonials from surgeons, from labs, from other dentists who are using our product. Right now we are available in 9 countries. We've got about 1,500 users. We've got over 50,000 patients in our system now, and we've been around for about 18 months, so we're very excited about that. And at last count, we've got about 800 files per week, and that seems to go up every single week. So we're pretty excited about the amount of traffic and the amount of information on our system, and we take what we do pretty seriously. You may have heard about us in different news articles. Watch for us. I think we've got a 2-page profile coming out in Dental Town next month. You can also read about us at Dentistry IQ or Dr. Bicuspid or Dental Software Advisor. In any case, if you do some searching, you'll definitely find us somewhere. So it's important to get your secure mail subscription. Go to secure-mail.com. Select your subscription, which is the dentist subscription, at $39.99 per month, and the coupon code again is Lavine. So I think that is my last slide. I'll leave this on the screen, and maybe we can entertain some questions.
Oh yeah, we got a few questions. Now, is that code live? Because I think someone already tried to put it in, and they said it was coming up invalid. So is the code live as far as you know?
As far as I know, it is live. Now, we will, thanks for letting us know. We'll check that immediately, and if it's not live right away, it will be within the next hour. I thought that was all taken care of, so we're going to give it a roll right now.
Okay. Well, we got a bunch of questions here, so
Great.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the secure mail stuff. Is there a limit to the number of emails they can send per month?
No, there's, you know, what we've found from our experiences, we want to encourage the use, and by putting in sort of artificial caps on the amount of data or the number of email messages, we really felt like we were almost hurting our users. Because what we don't want is for people to use less secure email options because they've reached a limit. So no, there's no limit, neither in actual data that's transmitted, nor in the number of email messages.
Okay, two-part question here.
Yeah.
If someone is using the secure mail system but the recipient is not, can they still get the information sent to them? And part B of that is, what is your liability as far as if you're sending it secure? What is your liability once it's been received at the other end if someone has chosen to not secure that information?
That's a great question. And so first of all, let me start with the second question first. There's a responsibility to secure the information. With most of the users or most of the people on this call, as the general dentist's office, you're the one who has taken consent for that information to be transmitted by the patient. So when you've taken that consent, you really bear the obligation to make sure that it's sent and received in a secure way. So you couldn't, for example, write the information on a postcard and mail the postcard. You couldn't also send it by email, even if your systems were secure. So back to the first question, which is an important one. What we do, and the way we keep our whole system secure, is when the person signs up for a secure mail account, they can send out free invitations to anyone who wants to communicate with them. So let's say in the specific example, you want to send something to a specialist or you want to send something to your lab. You would compose the messages I showed you, and when it didn't recognize an email, the email in our system, because they haven't been a member yet, what you can do is still send that message, but we will keep that message secure until they register their first name, last name, and practice name or lab name. And then we release that information. So it's a bit of a two-step process that only happens once. Once they've registered for the system, now they're a complete member, and now they're a complete member and they can communicate back and forth as much as you would like. We just tested, just to get back to the earlier point, we just tested the code and it appears to be working now. So just to follow up on that earlier point, Dr. Lavine.
So yeah, so just to follow up with that, so someone wants to get the service, they're paying the $30 a month. They can invite people, and those people do not have to pay the $30 a month. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, they don't have to pay because we've already got, the person who's securing the practice, which is our customer. They're given the opportunity to invite other people to collaborate with them. Now, there are certain restrictions around that. So, for example, it's kind of like you can register for every $30 account. You can register 25 users that will also have all of their information backed up. So not only is your information backed up, but all of their information is backed up as well, that they're communicating with you. Now, there are, further to that, you can also invite more than 25. We just have a limitation of how much backup we do on those accounts.
Would the person who is not a paying user, would they still be able to initiate secure emails? Okay, wow. That's
absolutely.
Very generous. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Usually most services will, they'll limit you. They can only reply to emails. But
No, it's again, we want to encourage the usage, and if you've got 25 partners out there that you want to work with on a regular basis, all of them need to be able to communicate information back to you, and so we've kept it very, very open. From our experience, 25 has been a very good number because people normally have a few labs and about 5 or 6 or 10 specialists, and so we've tried to give lots in order for that communication to occur.
Someone had a question about alternatives to this service. I would say that one of the reasons I wanted Rohit to come on here, besides the fact that he happens to be a very good speaker and very knowledgeable on this topic, is that I have been exploring encrypted emails for a number of years for our clients, and the best we were able to find was somewhere around $75 to $100 a month, and it did require both people to be paying members to do it, or the recipient could only reply. There were a number of limitations. I think the $30 price point is just unbelievably low, and I'm not sure how they're making money on it, but that's neither for me nor for Rohit to talk about. But I think it's considering what the fines are. I mean, you didn't really get into the fines a lot, and in my experience, even for first-time fines, you're looking at up to $50,000 for a first-time violation of HIPAA. So, $30 a month, $50,000 fine. That's not that much of a difficult decision from my standpoint.
Agreed.
Okay, a bunch more questions here. We access our files from home using Go to My PC. What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so you might be able to help me a little bit, Dr. Lavine. I don't know if that's an encrypted connection or the security opportunity with Go to My PC. I know that that's a seeming, I've seen other dentist's office do that. It actually seems to work like it's a very good solution. I would say that as long as the data is encrypted where it's residing, so back in your office it needs to be encrypted, and once you access it, you should be fine. That's at least my take on it. Dr. Lavine, do you know if the connections are all secured as well?
They are encrypted, and one of the things, and we've had to actually change. Over the years, until we became more aware of HIPAA and high-tech, we were installing a program called VNC. It stands for Virtual Network Computing. Most IT companies use it. It's very common. The problem is that with the new HIPAA and high-tech regulations, one of the things that they say is that you need to limit the access. You need to be able to log who actually is having that access. That is very difficult to do with VNC.
Right.
With LogMeIn, ones like those, typically, and I don't know about GoToMyPC, but certainly with LogMeIn, which is the one that we recommend, it is encrypted. You can limit access. You certainly can log who had access, when they had access. This is all part of the regulations, is that you can't just give people willy-nilly access to log into your systems remotely. So I'm not 100% sure on GoToMyPC, as I said. The beauty of LogMeIn is that it's free. I mean, GoToMyPC is typically around $20 a month. LogMeIn has different versions. We use the LogMeIn Pro and Central, so there is a cost that we do that for our clients. But if someone wants to do it on their own, they certainly can do it at no cost.
Excellent.
What about encryption of desktop computers? I would probably answer that is that most of the offices we work with, there really isn't a whole lot of data on those desktop computers. If you are, if you're using a standard client-server relationship, your practice management data, your images are all resting on the server. Perhaps you're going to have emails on there, which obviously this would take care of that issue. But is that your recommendation usually as well, is that most of the desktops don't necessarily need to be encrypted since there's really no information on there that's protected health information?
Yeah, that's what I've found as well. Some of the smaller practices tend to have, a little looser policies. So what I've seen in some small practices is that the digital camera, which takes all the patient information or takes all the patient pictures, that can be set up to a PC. And unfortunately, that type of information, especially where it's logged with patient, patient names, that type of information definitely needs to be encrypted. But I would agree with you. Most of the practices that I've been in, where there's a few desktop PCs, they've all been networked, and that server has all of the important information.
Yeah, someone had done a follow-up that they said, some information, like with SoftDent, they felt that a lot of it is on the desktop, and that's the basic rule of thumb is if there's protected health information on a device, then you absolutely should be encrypting it.
Agreed. And
go ahead.
Sorry, just the definition of protected health information is pretty generous in the sense that patient name, obviously, birth date, address, even images. Now, images with any sort of identifying mark. So if someone has a mole or something on their face that can be identified, all of those elements are seen to be protected health information. Now, some of the information you might get from the lab, if it's a 3D STL image, wouldn't necessarily be protected health information, but the fact is that every time I've seen a lab send back information, they use the patient name. So now as soon as they've used the patient name to identify that information, it's now protected health information, even if the actual image may not have been.
Okay. And someone had mentioned here as well, I had mentioned a few ones like TrueCrypt and BitLocker. Someone had mentioned one called PGP, which stands for Pretty Good Privacy, is also a decent software, and we've had people using that in the past. I just find TrueCrypt a little bit easier to work with. Let's see, we got a bunch more questions here. So if I have a local backup, why need the cloud? And the reason that I've been advocating, I hope you don't mind if I take that question.
No, please take it. Yeah, no.
Is that the problem with a local backup, and as I said, the way that we design our backups is to have a device in the office that is waterproof, shockproof, fireproof, it's as relatively bulletproof as any device out there. The problem is it is not melt-proof, and if there is a major disaster, a fire burning down, and we had a good friend of mine, actually, we did a webinar with him a couple of weeks ago. His office burned down because it was hit by lightning. There is, there's theft, there's floods, all those things are going to destroy your local backup. It's not going to do you a whole lot of good having that data in the office. So in my mind, it has to be taken out. If you're going to use something like a thumb drive, an external hard drive, which honestly most of the practices that before they start working with us, that's what they're doing. It certainly wouldn't be my first choice, but it's so easy, as I said, to encrypt that data. If you're going to take it off-site, you've got to have it encrypted. I mean, in my mind, I don't know if you have any statistics on this, Rohit, but I think theft or loss of thumb drives is the #1 data breach that occurs for practices.
Absolutely, it's the #1. If you look at all of the breaches, there's a place where you can go on the internet that talk very specifically about the breaches. I would say thumb drives are #1, laptops are #2, and then everything falls away after that. So very, very important to encrypt the data everywhere where you have patient information.
Okay. Is encryption necessary if no mobile devices are used for PHA, only in-office computers? I mean, I would think yes, but yeah, because that and Rohit had mentioned that there's 2 types of classification of data at rest and data in motion. Anything that's sitting on your server is considered at rest, and it absolutely, that's critical data. Yeah, in my mind, you really need to be doing that.
Absolutely.
Someone's saying that sometimes when they send cases to the lab, they use the patient name. So in those cases, obviously, they would probably be benefiting from something like secure mail. Do you have people using secure mail with labs?
Yeah, actually, some of our biggest customers are labs. They recognize that they're a target, and potentially even more than the practices, because they tend to deal with maybe hundreds of dentists or thousands of dentists, depending on the size. And so what we are finding is that the labs are actually driving some of the adoption of our product because they are potentially, higher on the chart of people to be audited by the people who are looking after the HIPAA laws. And so yes, every day. In fact, we've got some viewers in there that I didn't spend much time on, but as the labs get more digital, we've also included the ability for them to send full 3D images through our service. And so 3D STL images of an arch, for example, where they've taken some model, they've scanned it, and now can upload it through our system. That can be fully rotated and zoomed in, and you can take a very close look at all of that stuff. That happens all in our system, and so labs are using it quite a bit.
Okay, here's an interesting question. Is fax as HIPAA compliant just like a phone call? I'm not sure if either one is HIPAA compliant. I've been to my fair share of offices where the office manager is talking about a patient to a referring office or a physician's office right in front of the people in the waiting room, and that's obviously a HIPAA no-no. And certainly if your fax machine is anywhere near where patients can view it, obviously that would be a HIPAA violation as well, correct?
Yeah, and those are the offenses that I've seen as well. See so much information coming through the fax machine, but the location of the fax machine happens to be at the end of the counter, and at the end of the counter, all the patients have to walk by it. And so all they need to do is look down, and they'll see patient information sitting there, and that's a big, big, big no-no. If you need a fax machine, and I know that a lot of people use them regularly, you probably want it behind a locked door. Treat it like you would your patient file. Also, behind a locked door is best, but certainly out of the view of anyone who doesn't need to have access to it.
Okay. What about, someone's asking about GoDaddy email. Do you have any experience with that?
Yeah, we do actually. Some of the offices that we have gone in and replaced their systems, we're using GoDaddy. GoDaddy is absolutely not a secure server and doesn't comply with most of the HIPAA requirements.
Okay. Does HIPAA have any issues with sending a recall postcard by mail, saying that the recipient is due for like a checkup?
That's an interesting discussion. There was recently one of the sanctions that occurred was through phone calls, actually, in that particular example where someone had called the patient and left a message on a home answering machine about a particular treatment. And the sanction was that that treatment information shouldn't have been left on that phone record because it detailed the information of the treatment. So the recall ones are interesting because I think they fall into a bit of a gray zone. From my experience, what you would want as a minimum would be the consent of that patient to be able to send them emails. So many standard consent forms will have, lately anyways, the ability to say, well, we want to be able to communicate with you by email, and so, sign here. That should be absolutely fine. HIPAA doesn't get involved much with doctor-to-patient communication because they're not seen as part of the, covered entities, and I'm getting a little technical here, but you shouldn't have HIPAA problems. You still want to, I would say, for the purposes of privacy, you want to give enough information and not too much information, just so that as someone picks up that postcard, they shouldn't know everything about the treatment, but I think it's fine to be able to send them something.
Yeah. We had an interesting comment. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but if someone's basically complaining that the U.S. has the highest rate of lawyers per capita of anywhere in the world, and if that gets worse, what are doctors going to do who are trying to make a living and take care of the patients? And one of the things that I would try to get across, and when we decided to start offering HIPAA services to our clients, and we certainly do encryption, we offer the ability for people to have all their documents and policies and procedures in place, and these other things that we do as well. We decided that we were just going to try to look at what are the key things, what are the things that people are getting dinged for, what are the things that are easy to fix. In my mind, and you can chime in, Rohit, I have never come close to seeing a dental practice, or anyone for that matter, that would meet every HIPAA regulation. I mean, there's literally dozens, if not 100+ different regulations in place, and I think the question is, you're not going to get HIPAA compliant, but can you at least get close, or can you hit some of the big points, things like encryption and encrypted email, so that, if, God forbid, you ever do get audited, you can at least show that you've made a reasonable effort.
Yeah, the places where we're seeing the largest fines is where there's been no effort made. There's no policies and procedures made. With respect to the question, and lawyers, and I'm trying not to be sensitive here because I am one, but the fact is that I really see it as an extension of doctor-patient confidentiality, and there's the duty here is really to make sure that the information that's shared between the dentist and the patient remains secure. Now, if someone revealed, or if a patient revealed that they had was HIV positive, that they had diabetes and had something else, maybe a heart condition, it's that, to me, begs the question of doctor-patient confidentiality and the concerns that if that's not held in a secure way, we've done the patient a disservice. Now, we wrap it up into HIPAA, we wrap it up into PIPEDA, and there's lawyers and all of these things. I think the fact is that the electronic world needs to comply with doctor-patient confidentiality just like the real world does. And it is more confusing and it is more challenging. But last month I was teaching at a study club, and I spent an hour and a half talking about doctor-patient confidentiality and the importance of that. Now, we might wrap it up and say, well, listen, this tooth doesn't matter in doctor-patient confidentiality. I think it is a sliding scale, and I don't personally want a dentist who doesn't really pay attention to that, because I think it's all important, very important, from a doctor-patient confidentiality standpoint.
Yeah, I would agree. Okay, here's a kind of an interesting question. If a patient requests that we email a treatment plan to them, does that have to be encrypted?
Oh, that's a great question. There is, again, with the HIPAA laws, they don't tend to cover doctor-to-patient communication. Now, I would say there's a best practice approach to that. And the best practice approach is make sure you get the person's consent, because in some cases, that patient might be sharing their email address with the husband or someone else, because sometimes that happens. So you would want that person's consent to make sure that they said, yes, please do send it there. Now, assuming you have consent, you can probably send that information unencrypted. And it's tough for me to say that. But I think with respect to the HIPAA laws, it's not required. Now, we're starting to look at that and say, maybe that's a service we should offer because we're seeing that need and we're getting asked about it. I would say, Dr. Lavine, last time we did this webinar, I would say we had a number of people ask about how do I communicate better with my patients in a secure way, because I think there's the level of sensitivity to that. But that's not where HIPAA is going to actually intervene.
Okay. Another question here about a good way to remotely access their data. And as I said, we've had really good luck with LogMeIn. It's logmein.com. It's encrypted. It'll log everything for you, so you'll know, who logged in, when, how long they were on for. You really need to be able to track all that stuff.
Yeah.
What about using encrypted Word files? Are they compliant?
Encrypted Word files are fine. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so I mean, someone, if they wanted to go to the trouble, they could encrypt a Word file and send it over unencrypted email, but then, of course, the recipient's going to have to know the password to open up the file.
Well, not only that, within the body of the message, you couldn't mention anything because all of that would be unencrypted. So you could say something like, here's a referral or here's that information you asked about, but you couldn't mention the patient name.
Exactly, yeah. What about, are you familiar with something called Iron Key?
I am not.
Nor am I, so I can do a little research on that. They're asking if it's HIPAA compliant, but I'm not 100% sure what that is.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
So, question here about backup. So does this mean that it would be sufficient to have an on-site hard drive backup and a portable hard drive backup I take home with me every day? Again, if you're going to do that, which is probably the least expensive option, you got to make sure that you're encrypting that portable hard drive. If it's leaving the office, it absolutely, I mean, that's the #1 breach that we are seeing out there, are people losing or having their thumb drives or external hard drives stolen. We didn't really have a chance to talk a lot about the breach notification rule, but it's pretty severe. If you become, and there was actually an interesting discussion on this on Dentaltown, if you become aware that there has been a breach of protected health information data, and that breach can take a lot of different forms. As we said, losing an external hard drive would be at the top of that list. The law says there are 3 things that you absolutely must do. Number 1, you have to notify every patient of record, not an email, not a phone call, but a written letter, let them know that there was a breach and what data may have been breached, and that usually is things like Social Security numbers and credit card information. Number 2, you must have your practice listed on Health and Human Services website here in the U.S. Number 3, you have to notify the local media. It would be, in my mind, devastating for any practice to have to do that. And we talked a little bit before about the get-out-of-jail-free card. Encryption is your get-out-of-jail-free card. If you have an external hard drive that is stolen or lost and it's encrypted, you are exempt, as far as I know, from the breach notification. There was an interesting thing on Dentaltown that an office had been hit by a virus, and they decided that they were going to notify every one of their patients that there had been a virus. And I think that's a really gray area at best. I don't really myself consider a virus to be a breach of the data, but for whatever reason that practice did. And of course, as I said, you're going to lose patients no matter what. The question is how many you're going to lose. And it's so easy to be able to encrypt it.
Agreed. I would say that maybe that virus example is an interesting one, because it may have, depending on the virus, it may have actually grabbed some data and sent it out. And so I can understand why they may have chosen to do that. We stayed away from the breach notification rule, but I appreciate that you've brought it up, because for the reputational damage, and I'll take that surgeon, the orthopedic surgeon in Alberta, who had to, who was censured because he'd sent that information around. Well, he ended up having to change towns. He was in a smaller town and actually picked up and moved because I think the reputational damage that happened from careless email sending was enough to devastate his practice in a small town. Yeah, so it's a big deal. Yeah.
But just to follow up on what I was saying, as I said, I'm a huge fan of online backup. I'm not a fan of the cheapy ones, the Moseys, the Carbonites. I think that they have a lot of limitations. That's why we basically, we did what's called a roll your own. We basically took a data center and make sure that it was customized to be able to meet the HIPAA requirements, and that's where we send our data. But I definitely think the cloud is a better way to go.
Yeah.
Let's see here. So someone had mentioned some thumb drives like SanDisk have a vault which needs a password. Is that sufficient? If it's encrypted, then I think yes. It's very similar to the way that TrueCrypt works in programs like that. They basically create a separate folder. Anything that goes in there, you need a password in order to be able to access that data. So I don't know if you have any thoughts on that, Rohit.
Yep, I think I have seen some USB sticks. I don't know about the SanDisk one specifically, but they do have they are encrypted, and they come that way for this purpose. They also, what they do is they put certain restrictions on the types of passwords that you can have. So you can't you can't use your pet's name, Fido. You can't use that. There's a minimum number of characters. There's alphanumeric codes and other things that are required just to extend that security.
Okay, there's a few more questions here, and I did have a chance to go check out the that IronKey website, and as far as I can tell, it would meet HIPAA requirements. It is encrypted, which is really the key thing here. You've got to have a certain level of encryption. I don't think the HIPAA requirements specifically say whether it's got to be 128 or 256-bit or whatever, but from what I can tell from this site, it definitely meets all requirements.
Excellent.
Let's see what else here. Two more questions here. This is actually a good one here. Is it a problem if a staff member brings in a personal laptop to connect to the internet on our network that's connected to our server with patient information? One of the things that we recommend, and I'll let Rohit jump in here afterwards, one of the things that we always recommend is that for anyone like a staff member or patients, if you want to give them internet access as well, is to get a router that allows for what's called a guest zone. And a guest zone is, for the lack of a better description, it's a separate network. Any computers on the guest network can't see the office network and vice versa. They're actually on a different IP scheme, so they don't even know that each network exists. That's probably the safest way to do it, and there's a lot of routers out there. Linksys has one called the EA4500. These are not expensive routers. They're $130, $140 routers. To me, that would be a safer way to go. Obviously, if you're having your staff members connecting to the network, they also have access to that data, and we all know that sometimes when staff members are asked to leave, as in terminated, they don't always go quietly into that night. So what are your thoughts about that, Rohit, as far as allowing staff members access to their laptops?
I think it's the best, $150 you can spend. It's very easy to do, reasonably easy to set up, and it also enables your patients to be able to access, Wi-Fi, wireless internet while they are in your practice, and there's benefits to that, so that you can have them just passing their time, because everyone seems to have wireless device now that they carry with them. So I recommend that as well.
Okay. And final question, which I think is a great question: where in the world did you get the name Bright Squid from?
That's a great question. Very quickly. When we were drawing our initial sort of diagrams on the whiteboard, we'll go back about 5 years now, we had the cloud, the internet, the cloud was in the middle. And what was going down from there was all the people that we wanted to connect to. So we had dentists and labs, and we had all these connections that were coming off of this cloud. Well, when you squint your eyes, that kind of looked like a spider. But spidering on the internet means something very specifically. So we thought about octopus, but none of us could rhyme anything with octopus, so we didn't think that was a good name. And then but then we came up with squid. And the background of the company, the founder, when we were sitting, he's actually a radiologist. And so when we tacked on the fact that there are certain squids that have bioluminescence, which means they can light up dark spaces. And when we sort of came to that realization, that's what the radiologist said was, it's like poetry for what he does. As a radiologist, he likes to light up dark spaces. And so we had this affinity for the squid, and that's where, Bright Squid came from, just to brand the name. And so that's the short story. We've got, if you're interested in that, if you go to our site, brightsquid.com, we've got a blog that we've written about it. And it is by far the question that is most asked of our company. It's not about what we do. It's about how did you do that? So.
Well, Rohit, I want to thank you once again for an excellent presentation. I would encourage people, as we talked about this, and Rohit's not here to sell anything. He's here to give information, but he has spent a lot of time developing their secure mail system. I think it's a fantastic system. I think the price is really tough to beat. We've recommended it to a number of our clients as well. Just thank you again. It's always entertaining and educational, and hopefully people got something out of it.
Well, thanks very much again, Dr. Lavine. I appreciate you doing everything you do, and I would say that you have to take at least half the credit for this one, because I think you added as much as I did to this one, so I appreciate all the time and thinking that you've done towards it as well.
Well, thank you. Now, just a reminder to everyone that the special is good through June 15th, so you got a little time to think about it. When you log out, you're going to see two questions. Number one, would you like either myself, I can follow up with you and talk about our data backup system and disaster recovery. If you want to know more about secure mail, just indicate that you'd like Rohit or people at his company to follow up with you. And also, if you do want that checklist when you log out, just indicate that on there. We're going to send to everybody. I think we should probably just send it across the board, because there were so many people, Rohit, that said they wanted it.
Okay.
So we should send out the checklist to everyone, the link that they can go and see the previous webinar, the 10 burning questions as well. A lot of people had interest in that. So
excellent.
Great. Well, I want to thank you once again. Yeah,
my pleasure, and look forward to doing this again sometime.
We really should. It's a great topic, and especially as September comes up and people start to get really nervous about implementing a lot of the HIPAA regulations. I think it would be a great time to, not maybe the day before, but a month or two before to get people starting to think about it again.
Well,
I want to thank all of.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yep. Go ahead.
No, just thanks for everyone for tuning in, and I think the final message is it's time to get started, and it shouldn't be so onerous that you don't get moving on it.
I agree. Well, I want to thank Rohit once again. Thank all of you for joining us tonight. We know how valuable your time is, and hopefully you got some information that's beneficial to you. Many of you know that I do these webinars on a regular basis. We're taking a bit of a break for about a week and a half or so, but we're going to come back with talking about some new physics forceps that have come out recently. We'll talk about 6-month smiles. We've got a number of great topics, and hopefully we'll get Rohit to come back as well in the near future. So good night, everyone. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on future webinars. Take care.
Thanks very much.